Hi, everyone, and welcome back, or welcome if you've not been joining our book study. We are super excited to be back here on Keep Indiana Learning. I'm here today. I'm Brenny Coomer with my fellow innovation coaches for Keep Indiana Learning, Tim Arnold and Sara Atkinson, for our third installment of our dual book study, where we're discussing AI in education. Specifically, we're looking at the two books, Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, and then AI for Educators. Tim is always prepared with the book covers, by Indiana educator and author Matt Miller. If you are joining us live on our sessions today, we're pre-recorded, but if you're joining us live at other times, we're going to be in our YouTube channel, and all of the recordings will also be there if you want to go back, if you missed an episode, or want to look through some of our discussion questions along the way. We are going to be talking about lots of things AI, but specifically a couple of goals we have in this book study is exploring practical tools and applications of AI, strategies to enhance teaching and learning through AI, the ethical implications and considerations when using these tools, and really building some future-proof skills for ourselves as well as in our learning environment, whatever your role might be when regards to AI. So before we dive in, today we're talking about chapters 3 and 4, but we're going to do some brief introductions. So my name is Brenny Coomer. I'm the Assistant Director of EdTech in BCSC, which is in Columbus, South Central Indiana. I work in UDL and EdTech in my district, wear a lot of different hats, but love talking about innovative tech, creativity, accessibility, and inclusive design. My prior background is teaching social studies at the middle school and high school level, and I'm also on the Indiana Connected Educators Board. Now I'm going to pass it off to Tim to do his introduction.
Hey, everybody. My name's Tim Arnold. I'm a district e-learning specialist with Richmond Community Schools, eastern side of the state. Prior to this role, I served 26 years as a 7 through 12 social studies educator. I'm also an innovation coach with Keep Indiana Learning and an Indiana University Distinguished Jacobs Educator, and serve as a member of the HEC board. And I'll help have you listen to our guest today, Sara Atkinson.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. My name is Sara Atkinson. I am also a Keep Indiana Learning Innovation Coach. And by day, I am the Instructional Technology Coordinator for Duneland School Corporation, which is up in the northwest corner of Indiana in Chesterton. And prior to doing this job, I had the pleasure of serving as an instructional coach. And then before that, I taught elementary for about 10 years.
Awesome. We all included lots of geography pieces in our intro today. I started a trend with that just mainly because I was trying to think of where I was from and was stumbling over my words there a little bit, but geography lesson of Indiana, covering most corners of the state today. So in thinking about our book study, there was a lot of interesting tidbits in the chapters 3 and 4 today. So I'm going to open it up and kind of segue into some of these topics with a question here for our two guests today. And that is really tying into some of the uses and rules of AI that Ethan talks about in the book. So out of curiosity, how have you invited AI to the table to help you with the task, maybe this week or recently? And when was it helpful? And then on the flip side, when did AI give maybe less than ideal results?
I would say right now, probably I've got the opportunity to speak at a lot of conferences, a lot of schools, a lot of places. And usually a conference will have a theme. And so one of the first things I always do is try to find some sort of title for my presentation that fits the theme of the conference. And for me, the quickest and easiest and usually best way to do that is to at least start that search or that creation with some sort of an AI tool. So that's kind of my go-to right now.
I like to use AI in a similar way. It does a lot of pre-writing for me. In addition, I have found it really useful if I have a lot of qualitative data to go through and I need to find themes and different patterns in it. So like if I go out and I visit individual schools and I get 10 schools worth of notes, it's nice to be able to just copy and paste those notes into a chat GPT or something like it and ask it to pick out the big themes for me. It saves me a lot of time that way.
Oh, I love both of those ideas. See, that's the beautiful thing about talking with this is now we also get ideas of what we can use these tools for. I would say something that I have used AI for this week that's been helpful is kind of a blend of both of what you all said. I've been using it to help come up with some things for a conference that we're going to be hosting and kind of getting my creativity spark initially started, and then I just go from there. But I also use AI a lot to help me outline. Like I have a lot of ideas sometimes, and it's like basically kind of reins me in a little bit and helps me make sense of things in a way to where I don't feel as overwhelmed by the task at hand. And I have a bulleted list of things that I can do or a starting off point to dig into something a little bit deeper. And I also like using them to create like a printable outline for a larger presentation I'm doing. It just kind of summarizes content and pieces a little bit faster than other ways. So on the flip side, less than ideal results. And I'll start off on one real quick. I was using AI, like I was just honestly just testing it to see how it does with research because people were saying that it was getting better. And I was like, well, we're going to see. So I was writing some content and talking about accessibility. And I was using a couple different AI tools to see if they were helpful in pulling me to some research studies supporting what I was writing. And so I asked ChatGPT, like, can you give me 3 studies that talk about how AI has been helpful to students with dyslexia? Can you give me the specific studies and publications? And it made up 3 different ones. Like I had found some that I knew that were accurate, that actually took place, but it gave me fake studies. And then I called it out and I said, were those actually real? And it said, no, I made those up. I summarized some ideas of how it can help, but not actual studies. So that was one of those moments where it's like, you can't fully trust these tools. You have to be the critical thinker and the human in the loop.
I had a slightly similar situation recently, Brenny, where I needed some research to back a specific best practice. And it was a little more forthright with me. It just said up front, like, this is what I would envision the articles being called, but they were not real articles. But I would say I actually had a thing happen yesterday. I was helping a group of kids at our high school with learning how to use an AI tool called Conmigo. And there's a side to Conmigo that promises that it will help kids, it'll tutor them in math. So we did a very simple algebraic equation, and the job was to simplify it. And it walked us through, but then at the end, we were all kind of waiting for it to like do the final step, and it didn't. And so I asked it, is that your final answer? And it's like, yes. And it clearly was not done. And it was funny because everybody in the room just sort of stared at it for a while. So I would say math, it's still a huge limitation for AI.
Yeah, I was actually in a room with some administrators, and one of the administrators said, let me show you how easy this works and how great this is. And he just did kind of a general search asking for background information on one of the other people sitting in the room. And this person happened to be a former college and professional athlete. So he thought it would be fun to see what it came up with. And it clearly said that the person sitting in the room next to us interacting in our meeting had passed away in 2019. And so we all kind of looked at each other and thought, well, there's a good example of a hallucination because clearly this person is here and actively participating today.
Oh, that's wild. That is crazy when the person's sitting right there.
Yeah. A little uncomfortable for a couple of seconds, but once he laughed, it was all okay.
Oh my goodness. Well, that certainly ties into several of the different topics and themes that we have today. It's highlighted in our real life examples. AI can be super helpful, but there's also some limitations and things it does not do very well, or things that it makes up to try to make you happy along the way. So I think looking through our notes here, it looks like we all had some similar key ideas and extractions from these chapters. So let's just dive in. The chapter 3, at least, Mollick discusses 4 rules for co-intelligence. So always inviting AI to the table, be the human in the loop, treat AI like a person. And then the last 4 is assume this is the worst AI you will ever use. So let's just go around, I guess, talk about the ones that kind of resonated with us, what we thought to be impactful. And looking through our notes, it looks like we all wrote those down, but picked different quotes that resonated with us the most.
Sure. So the first principle that was explained was the jagged frontier of AI concept, which is that we have to realize that AI is really good at some things, but it definitely has some clear limitations. And unlike with us as humans, where it's a little more intuitive of what our limitations tend to be, the AI's limitations are a little more random and less intuitive to us. So, like, one of the most effective ways to understand what it can and can't do well is to actually use it. So, there's a lot of fear out there with regard to AI and not wanting to touch it and not wanting to allow students to learn how to use it. But your biggest protection is just using it and getting to know what it does well and what it doesn't do well.
Yeah, I like that point. That resonated with me, that, it's very expensive for large corporations to do things like this because it costs money and they don't want to pay for the trial and error stage. But it's very easy for individuals within the company to do their job and try these things out. And then the other thing that really stuck with me on that first point of inviting it to the table was, it can be a companion to our own thinking and decision making. It can help us reflect on our own choices. And that's I think a positive way to look at it. I think we'll get into some concerns and cautions here today later on, but to me, that was kind of the essence of what I saw into that first rule.
Agreed. And I think some of the things you learn, honestly, in inviting it to the table, you learn what it's good at and what it's not. You learn how to use these tools. And then in that, it shows you what type of things that maybe you don't bring AI to the table for. Like, I know that there are some creative things that I want to have my own touch and flair on it, and AI just can't bring that. It's not a human being. It's not as creative as what I might be. And when I try to train my teachers and show them about these tools, making it very obvious that there are limitations. And a lot of the times these tools are going to give you really generic answers. Creativity and the wild ideas and things you can come up with on your own that might spark excitement for your students or your students' interests aren't necessarily things that the AI picks up on or gives you as those initial outputs right away. And then being the human in the loop, we kind of talked about that a little bit. And this kind of connects back even to our last two episodes and talking about different types of AI. But really, these tools are very, very advanced text prediction machines, and they're going to get stuff wrong. They're trying to give you the output that they think is going to be the most logical or well-liked response based on the series of words that you put together in that space. And I think, page 53 to 55 kind of shows several examples of that. And, that's where the whole AI hallucinating, it wants to make you happy. It wants to give you the output it thinks is most desired. And sometimes those are made up things, and it's going to make things up just to make sure that you get a response when in reality, those things didn't happen. So I think that's why it's so important that we always have that critical thinker behind it, which is us. We need to have that human element.
I like the phrase that you used earlier about the text prediction machines, because it clearly said AI doesn't know anything, right? It's just feeding off of this large amount of data that it has, and it prioritizes making you happy over being accurate. And so that, being that human in the loop is always going to be important, whether it's in writing the prompt to pull out some of that creativity, or using your human creativity in writing the prompt, or checking the results of what you get.
Something that I've experimented with that you're reminding me of, Tim, is when I plug in my own writing or my own ideas into AI tools and I ask it for its critique or its feedback, I'll try 3 different versions of that. One is just straight up, tell me what you think of this. And it usually will kind of sugarcoat everything. And then my second prompt is always be brutally honest. And when I give it that prompt, it's way swinging in the other direction. And then my third is always, okay, can you combine the information from both and be as accurate as possible? And I get 3 different sets of feedback. So it can be kind of alarming to see the differences when it's acting matter of fact every single time.
Yeah, I love that idea. One of the things we talk about with our teachers when using AI to do maybe a first run on some student writing, whether it be through Magic School or something else, is make sure included in your prompt is very specifically what you want back. Please give them 3 glows and 3 grows, and it'll do that if you prompt it to do so. So you're braver than I, asking for the brutal one, but maybe I'll try that sometime.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet either. I've been too afraid. But now I want to. I want to see like how it's going to talk about my use of semicolons and em dashes in my writing and say that, hey, by the way, I also like to use those bits of punctuation. All right. And then point number 3, one of the other rules or principles that he gave was treating AI like a person. And then assuming number 4, that this is the worst AI you'll ever use. And I kind of feel like that led into even more discussion in chapter 4. But I'm curious to see what you all think about treating AI like a person. When I first read the title of that chapter and saw, not chapter, but that segment and saw the point, I was like, ooh, I don't like that. That kind of makes me feel icky because you hear all of these stories and you see studies about the ELIZA effect, and you see things where, anthropomorphizing technology and tools has had negative consequences. And I think it's important that we're aware of those. And I initially thought that he was not going to discuss that. But then the more I read, I was like, okay, that's exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about seeing AI as an alien person. We can't call it a person necessarily because it's not. But it's not just like a software where it's predictive in how it's going to act and respond. It's a little bit more advanced than that. It's a different type of entity in being. So I'm curious what you two thought about that little section of the text as well.
I really like that part where it said, treat it like a person, but tell it what kind of person it is. Right? It's very important that you want some control over the output that you're going to get. And then it went from that, and this really relates to our last live stream that we did with Matt Miller's book. It really gave a great example at the end of that about how to adapt that traditional 5-paragraph essay to have kids write prompts and watch their prompt writing increase as the essays that are produced go from mediocre to superior, because they get better at telling it what they want it to be or telling it what they want it to do. So that's part of being the human in the loop, but it's also about being very explicit with your instructions and getting, what you want out of it.
And what a good way to make that whole experience more accessible, because if you try the long way around it and try to just craft a prompt that is super, super descriptive without, personalizing it to a specific archetype, then you have to provide so much context and so much detail. And that is so difficult for so many people. So being able to give it a persona is like a shortcut, but it's not like a cheat at all. It's just trying to take advantage of what AI already knows and be able to get the information we really need from it.
Agreed. I also had highlighted the section that you had mentioned, Tim, where he talked about his own students using it with their writing. And I was like, oh, that's such a clever idea of having them practice through how not being descriptive can really give them very different results on their essay. And now knowing that Sara goes through and adds in 3 different contexts and gives the AI 3 different roles, she's already multiple steps ahead. She's already doing that with her own writing. And then I love the picture of the otter where it was showing this is the worst AI you're using today, the worst version of it, the not AI looking, the not otter looking AI generated image, and then the one that was. That was mainly chapter 3. Chapter 4, I feel like there was a little bit of similar talking points, but I'm curious to see. I know that some of the different examples it was giving, and even just the basically the thread that the author had with Bing that he was using to model just some of these different pieces was a little terrifying. I mean, it was wild to read, but it's also, I think, gives us a really nice reality check when we use these tools that there's not necessarily effective guardrails built into them on their own, and why it's so important that you know the limitations of these tools. And specifically the point he said, it's no longer a question of if the AI is going to pass the Turing test now. It's more of what passing the Turing test means for us as human beings, right? I was like, oh my gosh, that's one of those things we need to put on a t-shirt. We talked about quotes from these books and making t-shirts out of them. Maybe that can be a bumper sticker too. Kind of like those sci-fi movie quotes brought to life.
Yeah, this is one of those times when I wish that Kurt Vonnegut Jr. was still with us, because he was always so many years ahead predicting or, at least examining what things might be. And I'd really like to have some of his writing now to look at here. But you use the right word. The word is guardrails. And when we use this in the educational community, specifically when we use it with students, it's upon us to make sure that we have guardrails in place. And there are products out there that do that very well. My particular district is using Magic School, and we feel good about the student data and the kind of the closed environment where kids are getting to experience this. But that doesn't exist everywhere. And so I agree. This part of this chapter gave me some pause. I mean, there's some scary stuff in there, some things that really, really are going to take some thinking and some reflection about where this goes in the future. And we're not just talking about mistakes and hallucinations. We're talking about a lot of things. The idea that, it can create these personalized echo chambers, which I think we all see as dangerous. Anybody who's been in social media knows, and feels that on occasion, that am I hearing enough voices, or am I just hearing the voices that are like mine? And so things like that, I think, are what really gave me pause with this particular chapter.
Yeah, I think this chapter was a little spooky, I'll be honest. It's looking at the future, but in a way that's a little dystopian. So it made me think, and I'm still thinking about this. How is digital citizenship going to be changing in the next, 5 to 10 years? Because students need to become aware of these things like echo chambers and tolerance, and how that's impacted by AI just feeding us what it thinks we want. So it's giving me a little pause as well about, what's appropriate for different age levels, and what do we need to teach them before they leave us, so that when they're out there in the world and they have all these different tools at their disposal, and some of it's kind of being forced on them because it's just right there on our search engines and things, and our social media. What do we need to teach them so that they can be, well balanced and understand different perspectives, and to be using these tools in a way that doesn't hurt them? So yeah, it's a little spooky, but it's also really exciting to think of how AI is going to help us as a society. But there's implications as well.
Agreed. And you raise a really good point, Sara, about the need for this to be an even more robust digital citizenship type of curriculum. Like, honestly, I would love to see classes just dedicated to this, because it's so prevalent in our society, right? Like, our students need to know what tools are out there, what AI bits are already infused into tools that they've been using, whether personally in school or in other settings, and just some of the risk factors with them. And I don't think shielding them from that information does anyone any good, right? So I agree wholeheartedly. And I think some of this too, this chapter was certainly spooky, but I think it's a really important chapter in talking about AI. And I think we need to always remind our teachers, and I know all three of us work in ways where we're designing PD and we're supporting teachers. And this is not something you just throw into the hands of teachers and students without doing your due diligence, right? Like, you need to talk about these pieces and know some of the scary bits, and even just show sections of this book, not to terrify or to inspire the next dystopian novel or creepy thing, but those stories entice us because there's an element of them that seem like it's a reality. And this is something that is certainly getting closer and closer to that. And we need to be mindful of the risk factors and things associated with these tools. So on that concerning heavy note that we're wrapping things up with, I guess, I think this was an important chapter, and I could sit here and talk about all of this for hours and hours and hours. But I know that we covered some of the key pieces. So we do have some discussion questions for you all to ponder today. And if you had similar thoughts or reactions, please let us know. Some of the discussion questions we want to leave you with are: what are your thoughts related to some of the 4 rules or principles that the author Ethan Mollick gives in regards to using AI? And if you use any of these or kind of had similar perspectives in your integration of AI in your environment or your role. All right. And then if you could design an AI collaboration or an AI collaborator, a colleague to help you in your field, what capabilities would it have? And what boundaries would you set for its use, especially when we went through some of those historic examples that were referenced in the book and talking about AI's limitations? And then lastly, after reading this chapter, do you feel more optimistic or cautious about AI's role in human collaboration, and why? So some food for thoughts. Ponder these questions. Let us know your responses. We have many more amazing discussions coming up. Our next segment in the study is going to be going back to Matt Miller's book, AI for Educators. And it's going to be an AI illuminating discussion. That was my cheesy pun this time. I know Tim's always looking for those puns and dad jokes, but that is what we have for you all today. Thank you so much for joining, and hope to see you next time.